Hey everyone, ever walked into a room and forgot why? Or maybe you triple check if you locked the door, twice? We've all got our quirks, those little things that make us, well, us. But have you ever wondered if some of these quirks are actually neurotic behaviors? Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. We often think of neurotic behavior as something negative, something to be hidden away. But what if I told you that neurotic behaviors are incredibly common? In fact, they're more like everyday human experiences than something to be ashamed of. So, before you start diagnosing yourself or your friends, let's dive into the fascinating world of neurotic behaviors. We'll uncover what they are, why we have them, and how to navigate them in a fun and informative way. Get ready to laugh at yourself, learn something new, and maybe even embrace your inner neurotic. Here's the thing, neuroticism exists on a spectrum. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum, and it's not about labeling ourselves, it's about understanding ourselves better. So, buckle up, because we're about to demystify neurotic behaviors and see them for what they really are, a normal part of the human experience. Get ready to ditch the stigma and embrace the quirks because, trust me, understanding neurotic behaviors can be both liberating and empowering. Stay tuned. Alright, let's break it down. What exactly are neurotic behaviors? Essentially, they're persistent patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that stem from a place of anxiety or insecurity. Think of it like this, your brain is trying to protect you from perceived threats, even if those threats aren't always real. It's like when you leave the house and can't shake the feeling you forgot to unplug the iron. Your brain is going into overdrive, imagining worst-case scenarios, even though you probably unplugged it a million times. That's your inner neurotic voice trying to keep you safe, even if it's a little overzealous. Now, it's important to remember that everyone experiences anxiety and insecurity sometimes. That's totally normal. But with neurotic behaviors, these feelings and thoughts tend to be more frequent, intense, and harder to shake off. They can also start to interfere with your daily life, relationships, and overall well-being. Here's the thing about neurotic behaviors. They're not always as dramatic as we see in the movies. In fact, they often show up in subtle, everyday ways. Ever find yourself constantly seeking reassurance from others? Or maybe you're a master procrastinator, putting things off until the last minute because you're terrified of not doing them perfectly? Yep, those are examples of neurotic tendencies in action. And guess what? You're not alone. These behaviors are incredibly common and relatable. We all have our own little quirks and ways of coping with stress and uncertainty. The key is to recognize these patterns in ourselves and understand that they're often rooted in a desire to feel safe, in control, or worthy of love and acceptance. Remember that subscribing to this channel will help you better understand yourself and others. Just click that button below. So, how can you tell if you or someone you know might be dealing with neurotic behaviors? Well, there are some common signs to look out for. Keep in mind that these are just a few examples, and neuroticism can manifest in countless ways. One common sign is excessive worrying. We're talking about worrying about things that haven't even happened yet or things that are completely out of your control. Another sign is perfectionism. Now, striving for excellence is great, but neurotic perfectionism is different. It's about setting impossibly high standards and then beating yourself up when you inevitably don't meet them. You might also notice a tendency towards negative thinking. This can involve focusing on the worst-case scenario, dwelling on past mistakes, or having a hard time seeing the positive. And then there's people-pleasing. This is all about going to extreme lengths to avoid conflict or disapproval, even if it means sacrificing your own needs and desires. Remember, these are just a few examples, and neuroticism can look different for everyone. But the important thing is to start paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The more aware you are, the better equipped you'll be to understand and manage any neurotic tendencies that might be holding you back. So, we've talked about what neurotic behaviors look like, but where do they come from? Well, like most things in psychology, it's a bit of a nature and nurture cocktail. Let's start with the nature part. Research suggests that some people are genetically predisposed to be more emotionally sensitive and reactive. Think of it like this. Some people are born with a nervous system that's like a finely tuned instrument, picking up on every little change and reacting accordingly. This sensitivity can be a superpower, making you more attuned to your surroundings and the emotions of others. But it also means you might be more prone to anxiety and stress. Now, before you go blaming your genes for everything, remember that genes are just the blueprint. They don't determine your destiny. This is where nurture comes in. Our upbringing, experiences, and environment play a huge role in shaping how our neuroticism expresses itself. Our early childhood experiences in particular can have a lasting impact on our emotional development. Think back to when you were a kid. Did you grow up in a stable and loving environment where your needs were met consistently? Or was it more chaotic and unpredictable? If you experienced a lot of stress, trauma, or neglect early on, it can make you more likely to develop neurotic tendencies later in life. Why? Because your brain learns to be on high alert, constantly scanning for potential threats. It's like your inner alarm system is stuck on overdrive, even when there's no real danger present. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone who experiences a difficult childhood will become neurotic. Our brains are incredibly resilient, and we have an amazing capacity for healing and growth. But it does highlight the importance of understanding how our past experiences can shape our present-day thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Okay, so our genes and upbringing lay the groundwork, but what about those everyday triggers that can send our neuroticism into overdrive? Well, stress is a big one. When we're feeling stressed, our bodies go into fight or flight mode. This is a natural physiological response that's designed to help us deal with danger. But in today's fast-paced world, we're often bombarded with stressors that our ancient brains weren't quite equipped to handle. Work deadlines, relationship problems, financial worries, social media overload, it's enough to make anyone feel a little neurotic. And when we're constantly in this state of high alert, our neurotic tendencies can start to rear their heads. We might worry excessively, overthink everything, or become overly critical of ourselves and others. It's like our inner critic gets a megaphone and it's hard to shut it off. But it's not just our personal experiences that shape our neuroticism. The culture we live in also plays a role. Think about it. We live in a society that often glorifies busyness, perfectionism, and achievement. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that we need to be doing more, achieving more, and being more. No wonder so many of us feel anxious and inadequate. This pressure to conform to unrealistic standards can fuel our neurotic tendencies, making us feel like we're never good enough. And let's not forget about the role of social media. While it can be a great tool for connecting with others, it can also be a breeding ground for comparison, self-doubt, and FOMO, fear of missing out. When we're constantly bombarded with images of other people's seemingly perfect lives, it's easy to feel like we're falling short. This can trigger our neurotic tendencies, making us more likely to worry about what others think, seek reassurance, or strive for an unattainable level of perfection. Okay, so we've established that everyone has their quirks, and a little neuroticism is totally normal. But here's the thing, when these tendencies start to interfere with our daily lives, relationships, and overall well-being, it might be a sign that something more serious is going on. Think of it like this. Neuroticism exists on a spectrum. On one end, we have those everyday quirks that we might laugh about or even find endearing. But on the other end, we have more severe forms of neuroticism that can significantly impact our mental health. It's important to remember that mental health is just as important as physical health. And just like we wouldn't ignore a persistent cough or a broken leg, we shouldn't ignore signs that our mental health might need some attention. One of the most common mental health challenges associated with neuroticism is anxiety. And it makes sense, right? When our brains are wired to be on high alert, constantly scanning for potential threats, it's easy to get caught in a cycle of worry and fear. For someone with neurotic tendencies, even everyday situations can trigger feelings of anxiety. Public speaking, social gatherings, making decisions, these can all feel overwhelming and anxiety-provoking. And because people with neurotic tendencies are often very self-aware, they might also experience anxiety about their anxiety. They might worry about appearing nervous, being judged by others, or losing control of their emotions. It's like a vicious cycle that can be tough to break free from. While anxiety is often the first thing that comes to mind when we think about neuroticism, it's not the only mental health challenge that can be linked to these personality traits. Depression, too, can cast its shadow over those who struggle with neurotic tendencies. Now, it might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, we often associate neuroticism with excessive worry and anxiety, while depression is often characterized by feelings of sadness, emptiness, and hopelessness. But here's the thing. Neuroticism can fuel a negative thought cycle that, over time, can contribute to feelings of depression. When we're constantly criticizing ourselves, focusing on the negative, and expecting the worst, it can take a toll on our mood and outlook on life. It's like wearing a pair of glasses that filter out all the good and amplify all the bad. So we've talked about some of the mental health challenges that can be linked to neuroticism, but what can you do if you're struggling with these issues? First and foremost, remember that you're not alone. Mental health challenges are incredibly common, and there's absolutely no shame in seeking help. Think of it like this. If you had a physical health problem, you wouldn't hesitate to see a doctor, right? Mental health is just as important, and there are qualified professionals who can help you navigate these challenges. Therapy can be incredibly beneficial for understanding and managing neurotic behaviors. A therapist can help you identify the root causes of your anxiety, develop coping mechanisms for dealing with stress, and challenge those negative thought patterns that might be holding you back. Remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Taking that first step towards prioritizing your mental health can be a life-changing decision. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of neuroticism, but here's the good news. You don't have to let it control your life. Just like you can train a puppy to stop chewing on your slippers, you can train your brain to manage those neurotic tendencies. It takes time, effort, and a whole lot of patience, but trust me, it's possible. Think of it like this: your brain is like a muscle. The more you exercise it in healthy ways, the stronger and more resilient it becomes. And the same goes for managing neuroticism. The more you practice healthy coping mechanisms and challenge those negative thought patterns, the easier it becomes to keep your inner neurotic in check. Remember, you're not trying to get rid of your neuroticism entirely, it's a part of who you are. The goal is to develop a healthier relationship with it, one where it doesn't have to control your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Alright, let's get practical. What are some tangible things you can start doing today to manage those neurotic tendencies? Well, one of the most effective strategies is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Don't let the fancy name scare you. It's actually a very straightforward and practical approach. CBT focuses on identifying and changing negative thought patterns that contribute to anxiety and other mental health challenges. It's like retraining your brain to think in more balanced and helpful ways. Another powerful tool is mindfulness. This involves paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It sounds simple, but in our fast-paced, overstimulated world, it can be surprisingly challenging. But stick with it. Now let's talk about self-care. This is crucial for everyone, but it's especially important for folks with neurotic tendencies. Why? Because when we're stressed, overwhelmed, or sleep-deprived, our neuroticism tends to flare up. It's like our inner critic throws a tantrum when it doesn't get enough rest and relaxation. So, what does self-care look like when you're prone to neuroticism? Well, it's about identifying the things that help you feel grounded, centered, and at peace. It might be exercise, spending time in nature, listening to music, taking a long bath, or curling up with a good book. Experiment and find what works best for you. The key is to make self-care a non-negotiable part of your routine, not just something you squeeze in when you have time. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. Taking care of your physical, emotional, and mental well-being is essential for managing those neurotic tendencies and living your best life. Finally, let's talk about the importance of acceptance. Now, this doesn't mean resigning yourself to a life ruled by neuroticism. It's about acknowledging that these tendencies are a part of who you are, and that's okay. Think of it like this: we all have our strengths and weaknesses, our quirks and imperfections. It's what makes us unique. And instead of trying to fight against our neuroticism, we can choose to embrace it with compassion and understanding. Remember, you're not defined by your neuroticism. You're so much more than your anxieties, your worries, and your fears. And when you can accept yourself fully, quirks and all, you open yourself up to a world of possibilities. You allow yourself to live authentically, to connect with others on a deeper level, and to experience life to the fullest. So embrace your quirks, my friend. They're a part of what makes you, you. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but the conversation doesn't have to end here. If you found this video helpful, give it a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join our awesome community of curious minds. We've got tons of other videos exploring the complexities of human behavior, mental health, and everything in between. And don't forget to leave a comment below and tell us about your own experiences with neurotic behaviors. What are some of your quirks? What strategies have helped you manage those tendencies? Let's keep the conversation going and support each other on this wild ride called life. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.